It's Thursday, November 5th, and welcome to the New York Amsterdam News Podcast. I'm Cyril Josh Barker. We continue our coverage of the 2020 presidential election with my guest, Am News senior writer Herb Boyd. We're going to discuss the counting of the votes, possible outcomes, and what candidates from both sides are doing to make sure there's a fair election. We're just days after the 2020 general election, and as predicted, a winner for president has yet to be announced. Mail-in ballots are still being counted in battleground states, including Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada. Both Joe Biden and Donald Trump have clear paths to win the election if the number of votes tally in their favor to get to the 270 Electoral College votes needed to claim victory. And judging by the votes counted so far, it looks like it's going to be a pretty tight race. Am News writer Herb Boyd is with me to break all of this down and much more. So let's get into it now. Herb Boyd, how are you doing?
I'm good.
All right. Thank you so much for being on again. Second week.
It's a pleasure.
As we continue our coverage of the 2020 presidential election, actually, kind of a pickup from our last podcast that we had about the general election before, and here we are again a week later, and we still don't have a decision for president. But the first question I just want to ask you, in your opinion, based on what you're seeing on television, what you're hearing or seeing in the news, when do you think we will see a decision on who will be the next president of the United States?
Well, sometime before Thanksgiving.
Absolutely.
I think one of the problems we have, obviously, is that a massive turnout and the lack of preparation on a lot of the polling booths, to say nothing of the snafus that occur with the machines break down, the long lines, the mail-in situation, absentee ballots. So you got an accumulation of problems here that slows the whole process. And so I'm surprised. I'll be really amazed if we can get this done. They talk about Pennsylvania, for example. They're going to resume the count tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
So what happens today?
Right. Exactly. And we're seeing quite a close race. And we're also seeing, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is several news outlets are calling races, especially Arizona. We've seen Fox News and the AP say that, Biden won Arizona when those votes have not been counted yet. And, that's just one of a myriad of things that we're seeing when it comes to misunderstanding and mixed messages about this entire situation. Why is that? Why are all these messages going out there like this one about Biden, being only 6 points away from getting the Electoral College votes needed?
I think one of the things you have to do is depend on the source, where you're getting that information from. Mm-hmm. And I tend to rely on AP.
Okay, so do I.
Yeah. They kind of really take their time on this and assess all the different outlets and where all the information is coming from. Then they do their own tabulation, their own calculation on it. So they've been pretty accurate over the last several presidential elections.
Yeah, they have.
And making a call. And they don't make their call until they're absolutely certain about this thing. So what I'm hearing from them is what you just said, Josh. You're just like 6 electoral votes away from hitting 270. Mm-hmm. Now, no one else has that.
No.
I mean, you go to MSNBC and CNN, they have 253.
That's what I'm seeing from them, yeah.
Yeah, they're still stuck right there, and most of their numbers are frozen.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you look at the numbers, the overall count, for example, stands at 71 million to 68 million in terms of the overall count between the two candidates. So now we look at the raids that are, one of the problems that we're incurring is a number of protesters now showing up
Absolutely.
In Phoenix and in Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
These are Trump folks, and they're spurred on by his insinuations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Assertions that, this is a fraudulent. We knew that was coming.
Absolutely.
We anticipated that he would not be taking defeat lightly. And he's pulling out just about every stops and inciting and provoking his base, to say something about the situation, and so they're showing up, and it's gonna. I mean, the Civil War thing looks like it's a reset on the whole Civil War, and he is a carpetbagger.
Absolutely,
he is this Northerner has gone down there and assumed leadership of the Southern reaction. So I mean, look at the map. The map is amazing, Josh. I mean, it's like this here red thing all across the South. I mean, so the Confederacy, is it alive and well? Okay.
I know, right? It's and he now has residency in Florida, so absolutely a northern person who went down to Florida and now claims residency there and is definitely running the show when it comes to how they view. But I do want to talk to you about those protests because we are seeing that, and I think it's the irony of, them protesting because they don't like the way the election is going, and then, the protests that were happening over the summer over the injustices and social justice issues and racism that were going on, after the shooting of George Floyd and several other people. And here we're seeing these white Trump supporters going to these places where votes are being counted, trying to barge their way in and monitor this as if that's going to change, if they see something that they don't like, they can't change the vote. And, where you did mention the situation. I saw those videos coming out of Detroit where the folks were down there and the situation. But it's interesting. In Detroit, they're saying stop the count. But then in Arizona, they're saying count the votes. And these are both Trump, sides that are down there. And it's just interesting that both sides, I don't get to stop the vote. I don't get to stop the counting. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't. Votes that are, if you're stopping counts just because you're getting ahead, that doesn't make sense. And the irony also, I just want to say, is that he, we're hearing, that Biden took Michigan and that he took it almost, down to the percentage point that Trump took it in 2016 from Hillary Clinton. And he's having an issue. That's absolutely crazy to me. But on the flip side, also, we're seeing, Democratic, protests from mostly Democrats and Biden supporters who are telling the election boards to count the votes. And so we're seeing that too. And even here in New York City, we're seeing some activity where there's actually no count going on because all the votes here have been counted and went into Biden's favor. But what are we seeing here? This is just crazy. I mean, they got onto us for protesting against police brutality, but here they are getting arrested for count the votes. I don't get it. Or stop counting the votes. I don't understand.
Well, one of these things, we talk about a certain hypocrisy that's a part of the GOP, and certainly Trump is a representative of that, because I go back to the Supreme Court situation, right? You had Amy Coney Barrett, in other words, when Obama was in office and they would, tried to do that, McConnell and his crew was opposed to that. They couldn't do it.
Right.
So here they're in a similar situation, and suddenly they allow it to happen. So that, again, that's kind of the hypocritical aspects of this. 2020 is just like, it's so tumultuous a year, trying to get a grip on it. I mean, I was trying to tell some friends of mine, they was concerned about, like, is this an incipient civil war in the making?
Yeah.
I say, well, I wouldn't be surprised because some of these turnouts and the Trump people are far more violent.
Absolutely.
In terms of their reaction than the kind of urban unrest we talk about with our people out there in the street, because a lot of those folks, they pushed it a little bit too far in terms of the the vandalizing and breaking into stores and stuff like that. But you're always going to have that element. But you start talking about picking up guns. Yeah,
they are coming armed to these ballot counting places. Yeah,
that's a whole nother issue.
Yeah, and
anything could spark an outbreak. You have somebody can do something or say something, or hear a car could backfire, and next thing you know, boom, you have people being shot down. At these particular demonstrations. And he's inciting it all. I mean, he is not doing anything at all. And, of course, we knew that the calming effect coming from the Trump administration is impossible. It does not exist.
It certainly doesn't.
This thing is a fuel the fire. Yeah. Feed the fire. Feed the fire. Make the protesters happen. Lock them up. Lock them up. Stop the elections. Stop the elections. And you're absolutely right, Josh, in terms of the contradictions, the irony of this. In one way, keep it going. Another way, stop it. Can you make up your mind,
right? Yeah, both sides were seeing that. But I do want to talk to you about some of the legal avenues that Donald Trump is taking to try and win the election. You know, he has filed lawsuits in Michigan. He's filed lawsuits to stop counting in Pennsylvania and Georgia as well. And I'm sure there are going to be more that follow. And of course, we did know that this was going to happen, that he was going to try a legal path to try and win the election or try and halt the process while he tries to, think of a game plan somehow. I guess the question is how likely are these legal challenges going to work? Because he's saying that there's not enough access to see the counting and all these other things. And I heard somewhere that in Georgia, he's suing over like 53 votes or something like that because he thinks they're fraudulent. But even down to that small number of 53 votes, he has an issue with. But I guess, again, the question to you is how possible is it that these legal avenues are going to work for him?
Well, I think one of the things about it is going to have to have some consistency, because in one way, you're winning. The numbers at this point reflect that he's winning in Pennsylvania. So why you want to? I mean, what's the deal with that one? So you have a different feeling about Georgia, a different feeling about Arizona. But I think it's not going to happen because, and I'm listening to the Secretary of States, who really are the administrators of these electoral processes in these states, and they're all almost uniformly are saying it can't stop. It's going to proceed. Every vote has to be counted. Of course, the Pennsylvania situation was a very unique one because that's where the Supreme Court stepped in and said the count can continue, although the polls are closed. And the election, for all intents and purposes, is over. We're going to complete the count. That's where he wants to stop it because he's frozen it he wants to freeze it at a point where he's ahead. And of course, the mail-in votes is the most critical factor across the country. And that's true in Arizona. It was true in Michigan. That's why, you had this dramatic turn that happened almost overnight in Michigan and Wisconsin, because all of the mail-in votes were finally counted. And so that's what's going on right now in Georgia. That's what's happening out in Arizona and Nevada. But I think that all you need, if he can turn Nevada, then we're going to have another dynamic in terms of outrage coming from the Trump administration, I'm sure. I mean, they're going to just cry foul right to the finish line.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to go over to the Biden side because there are several ways that he could get a clear path to the White House. And of course, if he wins Pennsylvania, he can get those 270 votes needed over that number to get the electoral votes to go to the White House. And then of course, everybody has their eye on Georgia, which is actually surprising to me that they could become a blue state or could turn blue. With that, and give him to the White House. And of course, also with Arizona and Nevada, who are still counting their votes. And the margin is so razor thin on all these states, especially in Nevada and in Arizona. We're seeing, a very, very tight race in both places. And, it's obviously been said several times, I'm sure you can agree with me, that this election really is going to be decided on just a few thousand votes, or several thousand votes, I should say, not the millions or 100,000s. We're going to see a very small number of votes that are going to decide this race.
Well, one of the things about it is that if you look at the states that are currently in play, where they're talking about, projected things and nothing has been decided, if you add them up, if the numbers are true for both candidates, even if it's 253 and 214, the three states that Trump has in play, if you add up the electoral votes, he has 264. So he would have to run the table in order to get the 270 he needs, and even the three leading states that he has. So he doesn't have the numbers there. The path for Biden is much smaller. You say, okay, a difference of 40 electoral votes between the candidates. All he really needs at this point is Arizona and Nevada. and it would be over. So it's a whole different situation in terms of tabulating, what they have in terms of the path toward victory. Trump realizes his path toward victory narrows by the moment. It's shrinking with each count. It shrinks.
Right.
So Georgia then becomes a very significant, and Pennsylvania becomes significant, because if Biden takes each of those, then you can just go ahead and close shop.
Absolutely.
It's all over. It's
Right.
over. And all we have to wait for the outrage and the spewing of venom that comes from Trump crying foul and fraud, and that this is all rigged, the elections are rigged, and he incites his base to go ahead and take up arms on this situation.
Oh, God.
And that could be calamitous. That could
Absolutely.
be absolutely disastrous.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we're already getting a preview of that in Michigan and several other places where they've showed up to these ballot counting places with weapons, with guns, which is just outrageous completely. I just want to stay on. I was going to ask you a question, but I do want to step in and ask you another question about Trump. I heard this morning that, let's just say he does not win. He can run for he can run for another term as president in 2024. Do you think that that's possible? Do you think that he may, despite his age, despite whatever, do you think that there's a possibility he could run again in 2024?
Well, he's going to, first of all, he has to get the nomination.
Oh, okay.
I think the GOP is pretty much done with him.
Okay.
You still have you're going to have remnants of that. Trumpism is going to be around in some form, because that's the nature of the American society, the whole systemic racism that's so embedded. And that's one of the reasons you have the huge turnout. It's a split. This station is divided. Those numbers separated Democrats from Republicans. What is it, 3 million votes?
Yeah, something like that.
The same thing going back to 2016, 3 million votes again. So the popular thing now is that, we have a nation divided, and you wonder, what is that all about? And all you can say is that there's some people very much concerned about the browning of America.
Right. Very concerned about it.
Because in 2040, you have the majority of people of color will represent the majority come 2040. We have the census of 24. You take a look at the demographics in this country, and you see that the America has turned brown, completely brown by 2040.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of
so
that,
I think you have people concerned. Somebody admitted Trump he stands as representative of the people who are guarding against that kind of situation where, the black, brown people begin to have power and control, and that's what they want. His ego is so emboldened to kind of hold on. He can't accept loss.
No, he can't. And he even said himself. He even said himself that it would be bad. He's a bad loser. He even said, the day before the election, that if he lost, it'd be bad, or he's a bad loser.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of race, I did want to talk to you about a story that you wrote for this week's edition that's on our website. Biden needs the black vote to succeed. And I think that a lot of people need to understand that in these battleground states where these votes are being counted, the votes that are being counted are coming from our urban centers. And that includes Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, Atlanta and Georgia, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which he already won, and of course Detroit and Michigan, where he won also. Mm-hmm. And so it really, really depends on these urban centers where, again, most of these votes that are still being counted are coming from. And they're heavily Democratic. And I want you to talk a little bit about that and that whole situation, and why Biden, like you said in your headline, needs the black vote to succeed.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. You're absolutely right in terms of the metropolitan urban centers, where primarily the black vote. He's going to need that. But the Latino vote is still also a significant factor. Can't ignore that. And I think more and more attention is being given to that. Certainly, if you look at in Texas and you look at Arizona, that Latino vote is significantly important there. And it usually comes out to, it's no monolithic thing in terms of looking at the Hispanic community, but the 70-30 is the kind of ratio breakdown, and Biden gets 70% of the Hispanic vote, and Trump only gets 30%. He gets that 30% because of the Cuban Americans in Florida. That's where it comes in. It does not come into play in Texas and Arizona and Nevada, because usually it's a 70-30 situation there. So that's another critical factor to weigh. But of course, the mail-in votes seem to suggest that it's decisively, it's trending Biden all the way. And so that's an immediate concern, for the Trump administration. That's part of this outrage and the turnout in Phoenix and in Detroit. Let's see how that plays out, Josh.
Yeah, definitely. Again, I just find it amazing that, all this time we've been telling folks, here at the Amsterdam News about how important the black vote is. And right now we're seeing it in action right now. And so if enough black folks from Philadelphia, from West Philly came out, and from, Atlanta, down there, and also in Las Vegas, we could really see a difference here in who wins this White House. So again, black vote, so powerful. I want to talk to you about the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House. We didn't see the blue wave that we thought we would see, although it is still a pretty tight race as votes are continuing to be counted. Why didn't we see, now that the Dems are going to take the House, we got that, Dems, we understand that, but the Senate just couldn't get there with that. What happened with that?
Well, that was going to be a tough call anyway, no matter what you do with that. I mean, I didn't expect there would be a dramatic turn. We'd be lucky to get 4 or 5, 47, 48, the last count I saw.
Yeah.
And it's still about 3 or 4 still in contention, but they tended to follow, the Senate votes followed the presidential thing almost inseparably. Whatever state that Trump took, wherever was a red, then you could guarantee that the Senate candidate from the Republican Party would be the winner, and that was without exception. So it's a connection in terms of the top of the ballot and the down ballot. Of course, the House situation, we lost a few there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. But that's okay, because you've got a decisive number in the House of Representatives. We thought we had a good chance to turn it around, and we got 3 or 4 that were surprise victories. I thought that Maine would come in. That didn't do that well. I thought North Carolina would do a little bit better, but of course that's a red state, and it didn't turn. And of course the Arizona situation did turn. We got that Democrat, and Kelly came in. I think Mark Kelly out in Arizona. That was it. That was a surprise victory, because some of these are incumbents. You're going up against incumbents, and it's hard to get an incumbent out of there, as we discovered even with a Trump incumbency. It's not easy to kind of wedge him out of there. And I was hoping that we wouldn't have to bring the military in, and of course it's still up in the air. He hasn't taken his last stand. His last stand will probably be, I'm not going to leave the Oval Office. It's a fraudulent race. It's a rigged election. And that's where you have to see what the Pentagon, what the military says about this. And I think that's kind of the last word on the election, because what he did and what he said, he didn't. The impeachment, we couldn't get him out of there on the impeachment move. The lawsuits, he's defied that. To say nothing of, all of these accusations and sexual assault charges against him. He's got past that. But now the American populace has said, no, you got to go. So that's the last stand. Let's see how he gets around this one. And the only stand he can do is just be absolutely defiant and not leave the White House.
All righty. And of course, here in New York State and New York City, we saw several races. Of course, here are some of our state Senate races and our assembly races, along with races here in the city too. Some of our key folks, including Inez Dickens, and won her race, and let's see, Latrice Walker. Got some names here. Let's see. I'm just going down my list here as best I can. I had the list here. I'll just go down in a second. But Jamal Bailey here in the Bronx actually won his race, which is great. Richie Torres, who was a city council member here in the Bronx, is now going to Congress. Robert Jackson, Brian Benjamin in Harlem, Jose Serrano. The list goes on and on of the victories that we had here in New York State, as expected, because we're a mostly Democratic state here. You got Zelnor Myrie in Brooklyn as well. Yeah. And so expected. But we were having a conversation. I'm saying all this because yesterday, during our meeting, our editorial meeting, the day before the paper came out, we were just looking at the map of New York State. And even though, and I knew this, and everybody pretty much knows this, that downstate here in New York City, pretty much all Democratic with the exception of Staten Island. However, when you get to upstate, if New York City wasn't even here, in New York State, Donald Trump would have won this state because it's mostly red, up in the other places. And we even saw, especially in Long Island, we saw some races that pretty much all went Republican, excuse me. We saw, Jackie Gordon, who lost her race. She was a Democrat. And then we also saw, Nancy Guroff, another person, the scientist in, Long Island, who also lost her race to a Democrat. And, the makeup of the state, is just, it doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. But tell us a little about your take on New York State politics, especially during this election.
Well, one of the things so much depends on what district you're in and what appears on your ballot. Because you take a look at the ballot we got, I think the only individual there was Brian Benjamin and Al Taylor.
Right.
Those are only two that showed up here in our district. So it depends on which congressional district you're in terms of the ballot you get and trying to understand who you're voting for. And you flip our ballots over, and we got a bunch of judges back there. We don't know who these folks are.
Right.
So you have to go just like, based on Tanisha, okay, we go with that. But it depends on what part of the state you're in, and that's true across the country. In terms of how you begin to separate the Democrats from the Republicans, whether it's a kind of a divide, a north-south divide in the state. It's kind of interesting that you can look at Michigan, for example. The further you go north, the whiter it gets. New York, same way. The higher you go in the state, the whiter it gets. It's like the Reverend Sharpton used to say that some of that democratic process is like the Rocky Mountains. The higher you get, the whiter it gets.
Definitely, absolutely. All right. Well, last thing I do want to ask you about,
sure.
we just went over the possibilities of what could happen with the presidential election and the different paths that could happen, the different ways that it could happen. But what is your prediction for the 2020 presidential election at this point right now?
I think it'll have to, it won't go to the courts. I don't think it'll go to the courts. I think the Secretary of States in the contending, several states that are still in play, will make a decisions about the final count, and we'll see that Arizona and Nevada will certainly, that's all the Biden team needs at this point if the AP numbers are correct. So you got an outcome there. Now, even if Trump runs a table in terms of the ones that are trending in his favor at this point, he doesn't have the numbers. The numbers are not there.
Yeah.
People were talking about a possible 269 tie.
I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, but the numbers won't add up like that because you've got different kind of states in play.
Okay.
Now, because remember, you got Nebraska and Maine where they split it.
Right.
You can have Electoral 1 and Electoral 2 and stuff like that in terms of what part of the state you're in. So those are other factors that come into play, Josh. But my final word on that is Biden will win and get ready for McConnell.
All right. And with that, Herb, we'll conclude. Listen, thank you, Herb, so much for coming on the podcast
thank you,
today.
Baby.
Really appreciate
bye-bye.
it. Bye. That concludes this week's podcast. You can pick up the latest edition of the New York Amsterdam News on newsstands and get updates online at amsterdamnews.com. You can also keep up with us on Facebook at NY Amsterdam News and follow us on Twitter at NYAmNews. I'm Cyril Josh Barker. Thanks for listening.